Sorrow is a thread woven throughout Clair Obscur. The Descendre family's grief-fueled self-destruction, the plight of Lumiere, the thousands who've lost their lives since the fracture. But perhaps the most tragic of stories is one hidden from the spotlight. Deep in the bowels of the world, with neither light nor hope, a bygone warrior lies in a prison of madness. High above the clouds, a brilliant mind lies trapped behind unmovable doors in a body that's no longer her own. These two characters couldn't be further from one another in distance, but it is the bond of love and shared joy that ties their hearts close and transcends the barriers between. Though their lives have been destroyed, each is preserved by the hope that they might someday reunite. If this can't be, they will settle for vengeance against those responsible. This is the story of Simon and Clea. The fracture occurred roughly 7 decades ago, an event that shattered the continent in Old Lumiere, that spurred mass migrations of Gestrels, Grandis, and people, that saw the emergence of the paintress and monstrous Nevrons, and the beginnings of Gommage. Doomsday magic that erased people entirely and threatened existence. It was a period of unequaled woe, just a hint of which is captured in the journal entry of an old Lumieran survivor.
The Brigadiers are overdue from their mission to the monolith, and we've lost half our remaining fighting strength to these creatures and their relentless assault. All adults have taken up arms, but I'm a bookkeeper. What am I supposed to do? Count them before they slaughter us? We've hidden the children. At least they're warm and dry in the cellars, but rations are running low.
But beyond simply destruction, the fracture spread confusion. The status quo had been upended by powerful forces not seen before. While they gathered the pieces of their broken lives, it was up to survivors to investigate what happened. In truth, the fracture was the result of a feud between two gods of this world. The painter, Renoir de Cendre, and his wife Aline. But, as yet, there was no knowledge of the painters, no knowledge of outside worlds and other realities, no realization that this world was actually a canvas painted into being by the Descendre's son, Verso. In fact, it seems not even the painted facsimile of the Descendre family, whom Aline created to console her in grief over the loss of her son, knew the truth of their origins. It's the mystery of the fracture and the search for those missing that led to the first of Lumiere's expeditions, the legendary Expedition Zero. The Descendre held great influence in Old Lumiere, so it fell to them to organize a mission of rescue and discovery, for on the horizon a great slate of rock sprang from the earth, which became known as the monolith. Aline, the paintress and creator of Lumiere, had disappeared in the fracture, and though not explicitly stated, it's quite possible that at this time the eldest child, Clea Descendre, also went missing. This loss struck the Descendre hard. Renoir's deep desire to protect his family and keep it whole motivated him and his son Verso to gather volunteers for a daunting expedition to the monolith. Many followed Renoir's leadership, including Julie, a close friend of Verso's, and a man of great bearing called Simon, who joined the expedition not simply out of obligation, but because he loved Clea and vowed to find her. Thus, Expedition Zero set off. Locked within the submerged Renoir's drafts, beneath even the monolith's base, in a region of darkness called the Abyss, the sad remains of what had once been Simon confronts Expedition 33. How was it that a famed warrior of Expedition Zero came to such an end? Precious little of Simon's background and character are given throughout the lore, and much is left to inference or speculation. Verso tells us of a shared past with Simon.
You know him?
He's an old friend of mine. We joined Expedition Zero together. He disappeared and I thought...
And we know from Simon's own journal entry that his heart was Clea's.
I must put my words down on paper before I lose myself entirely. My beautiful Clea. What did she do to you?
Either he and Verso were childhood friends who grew up together, and Simon was eventually introduced to Verso's sister, or Simon and Clea had met first, and their intimacy brought him into Verso's orbit. What is clear is that Simon and Clea were bound by deep love. But beyond their romance, Simon was a skilled swordsman in Lumiere, perhaps training alongside Verso, or even teaching him about combat. That Simon gifts his weapon to Verso upon defeat suggests the two men held each other in high esteem, a bond forged in blood and difficulty during the battles of Expedition Zero. At some point, either through misfortune or choice, Simon broke from Expedition Zero, and as they continued to the monolith, he wandered in search of Clea. It's at this time that the real-world paintress Clea, who had entered the canvas to tip the struggle between Renoir and Aline in her father's favor, marked Simon for dark designs. From afar, she witnessed Simon's determination and power. He was a man no obstacle could stop, and one whom she could easily influence. Clea appeared as her painted counterpart and tricked Simon into believing her to be his love. She feigned affection and she wove lies. Clea sold Simon a story and used her powers as a paintress to subtly manipulate his mind. We hear this from his journal entry.
That paintress, she fooled me. She looked so much like you and I believed her story. She granted me the power to fell the axons and enter the monolith. I realized too late that she had warped my mind. That she had in fact taken you away. Locked you somewhere I could never reach.
Renoir had recently been trapped beneath the monolith by Aline, which was surrounded by a barrier of chroma, the essence and energy of the canvas. Cut from much of his power, Renoir struggled in vain against his wife. He needed to be freed, and to this end, Clea directed Simon. She greatly enhanced his sword skill, blessed him with immense power and a blade of blinding light, then bade him attack the axon in Old Lumiere. The axons, Renoir's imaginative representations of his family, were created of pure chroma, the hearts of which could be used to cross the monolith's barrier. But they were dreadful and nearly impossible to kill. It speaks to both Simon's prowess and his recently endowed ability that this man single-handedly felled the axon in Old Lumiere. At the time of Expedition 33, its corpse still rests in the city's abandoned streets, impaled and surrounded by blades of light which can be seen from a great distance. The death of this axon, the Hauler, which interestingly was the depiction of Clea, would be used by Clea to weaken the seal on Renoir's prison enough that a projection of him in the form of the Curator escaped and influenced future events. This also allowed him to begin the cycle of gommage that plagued the canvas for decades. Victorious and empowered, Simon passed through the monolith's chroma barrier, intending to kill the paintress, doubtless a seed of treachery planted in his mind by Clea. But this is where Simon is restored to clarity, and terrible revelations are given. Aline, as master of the canvas, controls much of the world's chroma. Not only that, we know the area surrounding the monolith is suffused with the woman's memories, almost a part of her. Aline's influence within the chroma barrier is absolute, and it's powerful enough to cleanse from Simon lingering manipulations. Simon's journal continues.
But then I met Aline, who showed me that I could save you. With her help, I descended to the bottom of the monolith, where Aline had sealed him away. The one who brings the gommage. The one who threatens our very existence.
News of his love's capture and imprisonment left Simon dejected, but consumed with rage. Ever a man of action, he swore an oath to release the painted Clea from bondage at any cost. But Aline was hamstrung due to her stalemate with her husband, so to save Clea, he had first to confront Renoir. Simon, a warrior of growing legend who had defeated an axon, was blessed by one god of the canvas to face another in its deepest reaches. Now, whether Aline sent Simon to defeat Renoir or simply guard his prison isn't stated, but at least to me, it seems Simon was made to be a gatekeeper, a seal on terrible forces that could destroy the canvas entirely if unleashed. In the lightless despair of the abyss, Simon continued his lonely vigil. Though a powerful man, Renoir's continued influence slowly degraded Simon's mind, and madness approached. We hear this descent.
But his powers are strong, and I'm finding it harder and harder to fight his influence over my mind. My mind is breaking. My final thoughts are only a few. I despair.
Simon's final thoughts, his last conscious moments, are of his love Clea and his burning desire to return to her. When Expedition 33 finds him, Simon is a husk of what he had been, pitiful and broken. He's not the man Verso knew, but a creature painted over and over again, bent to the wills of others. His skill is no less, and the fight against him is daunting. One of Simon's attacks, the Sword of Lumiere, might hint that he was given the moniker before and during his exploits with Expedition Zero, and that only later were future expeditioners called the Sword of Lumiere, a collective assumption of Simon's mantle in his honor. During the second phase of his fight, we hear the voice of painted Clea play in his mind. Memory of her momentarily clears his thoughts, reminds him of his vow, and invigorates him.
To find me, to free me from her grasp. Would you fall now to the likes of them? While your oath remains unfulfilled.
But Simon's only half of the story. What happened to the painted version of Clea? What tragedy kept their love from blossoming? Aline created her canvas family with the images and feelings she had of their real-life counterparts. They were brushed with subjective emotion. From what we know of the real-world Clea, her painted version was probably skilled and willful, the burden of responsibility thrust upon the eldest child that she likely bore with grace. She was probably a woman of action and of single-minded focus. But the painted dessins are reflections of Aline's view, and this canvas Clea differed from her real counterpart in many untold respects. The real Clea is grudging and vengeful. She wishes to hunt those responsible for her brother's death and will stop at nothing, which casts a flare of detached cruelty, especially in how she interacts with the canvas. It could be that the painted Clea differed in one significant respect: her capacity for compassion and empathy. This isn't to say that Clea is a monster, but grief had turned her to anger rather than love. Painted Clea's open heart and potential drew Simon like a moth to flame, and the relationship ignited. But the strength of their bond was tested during the fracture, which also coincided with Paintress Clea's entrance into the canvas. Through dialogue with the White Nevrons, the young boy, and with Clea herself, it's revealed that she is the creator of Nevrons, monstrous beasts that are drawn to Chroma and ravage the continent in their desire to extinguish all beings that possess it.
Aline is more skilled than Renoir, but I've tipped the scales in his favor. I have my pets in place. She who controls Chroma controls the canvas. I can't take her Chroma, but I can keep it from returning to her.
Clea planned for the Nevrons to lock Chroma in stasis and slowly drain Aline's strength until Renoir could overcome her and forcefully remove her from the canvas. But painting Nevrons took time and pulled Clea away from what she thought more important: the real-world conflict with the Riders and vengeance for Verso. So, she thought to deputize a canvas inhabitant, empower them and command them to continue producing Nevrons. Clea found the perfect mark in her painted counterpart. Upon their creation, Aline had already elevated her painted family above other canvas beings by blessing them with immortality and strength beside. So the painted Clea was a perfect foundation for the real Clea's designs. When Clea entered the canvas and found her counterpart, she disdained everything about her. Her perfectionist nature resented the flaws she saw in the painted Clea and despised or was envious of what Aline had added. In malice, Clea sought to undo the painted Clea's reality, to destroy her relationship with Simon and break both of them, transforming them into extensions of her own will. We hear from Maëlle Clea's resentment.
I bet Claire hated Maman's portrait of her, so she painted over her. I can't repaint her. Claire's the only one skilled enough to paint over someone else's creation.
During the tremors of the fracture, while confusion reigned, Clea abducted her painted counterpart and brought her to the Flying Manor. This was Clea's old playhouse when she was a child, who went on many adventures in this painted world alongside Verso, Monoko, Esquier, and Francois. Clea hadn't entered the canvas since her youth, but when she returned, she took up her old residence. We hear this in conversation with the gestural merchant. Where Simon was intended to directly confront Aline, Painted Clea was purposed to indirectly remove Aline's resources. The paintress Clea demonstrated her skill by preserving the outline of Painted Clea, but brushing over the finer details to suit her needs. She twisted the painted version's mind, broke her will, and bound her in chains as a slave to the real Clea's designs. From the young boy in the Flying Manor, we learn that this process and her imprisonment removed from Painted Clea her chroma and unmade her. Though a thing that looks like Clea is trapped behind the manor's doors, it's Clea no longer. Clea endowed her painted counterpart with a unique ability, the power, albeit limited, of a painter. She's given the power to gather and shape chroma, and commanded to eternally produce nevrons from within the Flying Manor. She's both physically imprisoned and mentally bound, but a fraction of her retains the memory of Simon, her beloved. And the hope of a future reunion preserves her. Shortly after Clea brushed over her painted version is when she approached Simon, who had gone searching for his missing love, and under disguise fabricated the story that would lead to his ruin. As the rest of Expedition Zero reached the monolith, the real Clea confronted them and revealed to them the nature of their reality, the truth of their world.
I've met her 3 times.
You have?
The first time was right after the fracture with Expedition Zero. She stopped us at the barrier.
She told you everything then?
Yeah. Then tried to kill us when we wouldn't go home.
After this meddling paintress left, Verso searched long for his sister, but when no trace was uncovered, he assumed she died. For decades, however, she was forced to suffer a crueler fate, a prisoner forever locked from her heart's companion and made to create monsters that destroyed her world. Much later, when Expedition 33 finally locates the Flying Manor, do they try to liberate Clea from bondage. But Maëlle isn't skilled enough to undo that which her sister had done. Verso's only solace is to end his sister's life. During her boss fight, we see the painted Clea's outstanding command of chroma, considering she isn't a paintress herself, which only speaks to the skill of the real Clea. She summons nevrons and opens chroma portals to continually heal. Once defeated, a fraction of Clea's soul frees itself and recognition glimmers in her eye. To escape this prison, to reunite with Simon in the next life, is her only desire, so the painted Clea commits suicide. An interesting note, Clea's life, the Pictos gathered after beating her, which restores its wielder to full HP, is a strong counter to Simon's life-draining ability during his own boss fight. This solidifies their relationship and the deep affection they feel for each other. So, this is the fate of 2 star-crossed lovers, sentenced to eternal penance by a literal god of their canvas world. Their only crime? That they cared for one another, and that they bore semblance to the real-world Clea. Simon, a legendary swordsman who challenged axons, nevrons, and death, fell for a lie and was destined to stand guard over a prison that surrounded him in madness and gloom. Clea, the shining light and responsible daughter of House Desange, was captured by her doppelganger and broken, remade into a slave forced to produce abominations. These 2 are tied by a thin thread, but one proven stronger than steel. Their greatest tragedy is that Simon and Clea, though they kept always the memory of one another, would never again embrace. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this video on the story of Simon and Clea. Let me know your thoughts on this couple, the actions of the real-world Clea, as well as suggestions for future videos in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel where content is uploaded frequently. I'd like to thank my patrons over on Patreon whose support means the world to me and helps the channel continue to improve. If you'd like to become a lore luminary for access to me, a great community, written scripts, and early video drops, head to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.